President. And I think that we have reached that moment, and we will remember this moment in history. Let's listen in.
Thank you. The Judiciary Committee will come to order, a quorum being present. Having agreed yesterday to the amendment in the nature of a substitute on articles of impeachment against President Donald J. Trump, the pending business is reporting the resolution favorably to the House. Reporting quorum being present, the question is now on the motion to report the resolution H-Res 755 is amended favorably to the House. Pursuant to Clause 5 of House Rule 16, because the resolution contains two distinct propositions, we will divide the question between the two articles. The question now is on Article 1 of the resolution, impeaching President Donald J. Trump for abusing his powers. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen?
Aye.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch?
Aye.
Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass?
Aye.
Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Mr. Richmond votes yes. Mr. Jeffries?
Aye.
Mr. Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline?
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell?
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal?
Aye.
Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demings?
Aye.
Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa?
Yes.
Mr. Correa votes yes. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath?
Aye.
Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. McCarcel Powell?
Aye.
Ms. McCarcel Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner?
No.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat?
No.
Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert?
My vote is no.
Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck?
No.
Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Radcliffe? Mr. Radcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock?
No.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask how I'm recorded?
How is the gentleman recorded?
Mr. Gomert, you are recorded as no.
Yeah, I want to make sure.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 23 ayes and 17 noes.
The article is agreed to. The question now is on Article 2 of the resolution, impeaching President Donald J. Trump for obstructing Congress. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen?
Aye.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch?
Aye.
Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass?
Aye.
Ms. Bass votes aye. Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Mr. Richmond votes yes. Mr. Jeffries?
Aye.
Mr. Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline?
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell?
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal?
Aye.
Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demmings?
Aye.
Ms. Demmings votes aye. Mr. Correa?
Yes.
Mr. Correa votes yes. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath?
Aye.
Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. McCarcel Powell?
Aye.
Ms. McCarcel Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner?
No.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert?
No.
Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Radcliffe? Mr. Radcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby?
No.
Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock?
No.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Is there every member of the committee who wishes to vote voted? The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 23 ayes and 17 noes.
The article is agreed to. The resolution is amended as ordered reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman,
For
pursuant,
what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
pursuant to Clause 2L of Rule 11, I give notice of intent to file dissenting views.
Notice is heard. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
There you go.
And there you have it. History has been made. The House Judiciary Committee this morning voting along party lines 23 to 17 in both instances on the 2 articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. There was some debate in this committee about how many articles to bring. They settled on 2. 9 pages, the original document, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. David Jolly, your thoughts?
The whispers of history around this president and his presidency became a roar this morning, Nicole. A majority of the House Judiciary Committee has determined that Donald Trump as president impugned the office, impugned the nation, and in the language of the impeachment articles that were just approved, should be disqualified from holding any position of honor or trust or profit in the United States. And that roar of history will now follow Donald Trump in his presidency. No tweet can undo what just happened to Donald Trump's presidency this morning. He was caught doing wrong by the nation, doing wrong by the office that he holds, has been loaned for 4 years, and today he was held accountable for that. The full House will have a voice next week, and presuming they agree with the Judiciary Committee, we will see the President of the United States on trial in the United States Senate after the new year.
Garrett Hake is on Capitol Hill for us on this historic moment. Garrett, I know you had a late...
This morning, because I've been watching this all day long yesterday, and maybe that was one reason why that I failed to view some of the content that I put out to my viewers late yesterday evening, was because I have been so distraught by all this to the point that it has just been drooling, just absolutely drooling in my nerves. It's been such of a hardcore event to have to live through and to watch, not from a historical standpoint, but from a realistical standpoint. And this morning, whenever I woke up and I put out my message to Mr. Tommy Moore, and I put out my other messages to all my other people, as I was making my coffee this morning, getting the coffee grounds out of the coffee thermos, putting them into where the filter is, I noticed my hand was shaking. And I had never been in a position in life throughout all the close encounters that I've ever been in of watching my hand literally shaking as I was taking a spoonful of coffee and putting it into my filter, thinking to myself, my God, what has all this done to me? Because I knew the drama, the intensing anxiety had reached a boiling point in my life, to the point that now it was affecting my nerves. It was affecting how my body was reacting to all this. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really, really taking a toll on my life. And if it's taking a toll on my life, how many other lives out there has it taken a toll on towards doing the exact same thing? These are serious matters that we have just got through witnessing, historically, monumentally speaking.
Tonight I was following your calls for energy drinks, but obviously something pretty remarkable to witness there this morning.
Yeah, Nicole, when they recessed last night, the chairman said he wanted everyone to go home and think about this. And coming back this morning, there was some thought among those of us who've been covering this that Republicans would try to gum up the works a little bit more, offer some more procedural votes, try to dismiss the hearing. But I think going home for even a few hours of sleep took some of the vinegar out of these proceedings. This was always going to be a foregone conclusion how this vote in this committee would go. And I think we saw that realized a little bit this morning. That does not mean that the fight over this is over. I expect to see at least a day or two next week of a very bitter fight over these articles on the House floor. Democrats have largely given up the hopes that they're going to convince any Republicans to come across the aisle and vote in favor of these articles. But that's not true going the other way. There are still Republicans who think they might be able to peel off some of these vulnerable Democrats in frontline districts, and will make an effort to cast this as something that will be damning to the Democratic Party in the future. So I think expect to see next week Republicans really aggressively targeting, particularly some of those freshman members, to try to convince them that this didn't rise to the level and to vote against these articles on the House floor. We are far from done with this.
Garrett, you cover the whole building there. Any reaction among Democrats or Republicans to Mitch McConnell saying the quiet part out loud last night, that the Senate trial has been rigged? He's in constant contact with the president's White House counsel. He'll be defending Donald Trump in any Senate trial, and the outcome is known to him.
Yeah, look, Democrats are frustrated by this. McConnell's feelings about this were no big secret, but him saying it on national television last night does change the dynamic a little bit. I mean, it's ironic because the president has said he wants to go to the Senate for a fair trial. That's why he hasn't participated in anything the House has done. Well, now the House says, how can this be a fair trial if essentially the foreman of the jury is saying this won't get done? I mean, McConnell's been saying this for weeks, that he sees no chance that the president gets convicted. Lately, he started to say he sees basically no chance that any Republican votes in favor of conviction. But yeah, look, Democrats are frustrated. They would like to be able to go and present their case in a clean and straightforward way in front of the Senate, but that's not what they're going to get. They're going to get a little bit of a shell of a trial here, essentially, an opportunity to present the reports as they exist right now, and then probably an up or down vote on acquittal or on the articles themselves before witnesses are called. There is one wrinkle in this, that any four senators, essentially, if any four Republican senators can decide what they want to hear. This is a 50 vote or a 51 vote threshold. Mike Pence doesn't get to participate in this. So if any four Republican senators decide, you know what, they do want to hear from a John Bolton or a Mick Mulvaney on the Senate floor, there is that possibility, but it is the slenderest of possibilities that we see anything more than a pro forma trial on the Senate floor right now.
Heidi Presbella, the slenderest of possibilities, has come to define those of us that cover politics in the year 2019. This is your beat as well. Your thoughts on this historic morning?
You could just tell from the looks on all of their faces, Nicole, that this is a moment in history that none of them really wanted. No one knows how the politics of this are going to play out. For Democrats, this is truly about the Constitution. And for Republicans, they say this is an unfair process. It's a good time to remind everyone that just a week ago, 500 legal scholars, not just the legal scholars who were called before the Judiciary Committee, but 500 of the nation's finest legal scholars said that the president did commit impeachable offenses. So far, we know of one who feels strongly against this process, which was Jonathan Turley, who was the Republicans' witness. But if you listen, even on Fox News, even Ken Starr, his main argument against this and why this shouldn't go forward is not one about the Constitution. It's that this isn't bipartisan, and that from a political perspective, only bipartisan impeachments are successful. So again, let's just stick to the fundamentals of why we are here. Democrats tell me it's really not about Ukraine. It's about us. It's about the United States and our system of democracy, and that unlike anything that we've seen in the history of this country, this president abused his power in all three ways that the founders feared the most. He abused it for personal gain, he betrayed the national security, and corrupted elections, full stop. That is the Democratic argument.
We are lucky to be joined now by NBC News correspondent Hans Nichols, who's at the White House. Hans, you and I have lived through some history together, but none of this strife. This morning, the House Judiciary Committee voting on 2 articles of impeachment against the guy in the office with no corners. Your thoughts?
Well, at least as of earlier this morning, the president wasn't watching the proceedings live on television. We do know that Rudy Giuliani is at the White House. We saw him, and since you know the grounds so well, this will make some sense to you, but he's walking from the old executive office building, Eisenhower office building, into the West Wing, accompanied by his son, who also works here. We don't know, and I stress, no one will tell us here whether or not Rudy has a meeting on the schedule with the President of the United States. We do know that President Donald Trump is meeting his Paraguayan counterpart. They're likely to talk and meet the cameras at about 11:10. And it's at that point that we'll get some sort of sense of where the president is on this next phase. And I think crucially, we should be able to tell whether or not he spoke with Rudy Giuliani, to what extent the president reads out this idea of whatever Rudy came up with in Ukraine, coming back with. Remember, the president said that Rudy was eager to share his findings. We may see whether or not Rudy Giuliani got to the president, and if he is still the president's personal attorney. Nicole?
So many echoes of fascinating history when you talk about 2 generations of Giulianis walking from the OEOB to the building that houses the West Wing and the residents. What's amazing to me, Hans, is this is also a story, no matter what you think of Donald J. Trump, of his brazenness. The day after Robert S. Mueller testified before Congress about a Russian attack, really, on the 2016 election, Donald Trump reached out to another foreign government to seek their involvement, their engagement in the 2020 election. Any sense that anyone there thinks that the president has taken anything from getting caught red-handed, or is it all a story again and always about brazenness?
It seems it's business as usual here, and there's a certain bunker mentality, but that's been the mentality for, if not the last 6 months, the last 3 years. You know, there's a lot of discussion right now on who's actually going to represent the president when this trial goes to the Senate. Pam Bondi was just on Fox News pouring cold water on the idea that Pat Cipollone is going to be the main attorney that will be representing the president down there. She had kind things to say about Pat Cipollone, but on all this, Nicole, I just go back to what the president said about 6 weeks ago, and he said, the team is me. And regardless of actually there in the Senate and the well of the Senate representing the president's still going to be his own attorney, his own defender, and he'll do it whether it's on Twitter or whether or not he's standing next to a foreign leader. We are going to see what the president's latest reaction is here in just a little bit. And I just stress to listen carefully to see whether or not we think he's spoken to Rudy Giuliani beforehand, where he goes after, and whether or not he tries to tout this, what looks to be, at least from the Chinese side, a completed trade deal. Because when you talk to the president's advisors on what really matters for his reelection, they're actually not that focused on impeachment. They'll mention it, you get different views on it. They're very focused on the state of the economy and the extent to which the USMCA, the trade deal with Canada and Mexico, as well as the China trade deal, gooses the economy. There's a broad recognition here that is of crucial importance. Nicole?
And if only they could get their boss to focus on the same things. Hans Nichols at the White House for us. Thank you so much. It is remarkable on so many levels that Rudy Giuliani is at the White House today, walking. Hans Nichols reports he's walking across that short driveway where senior staffers park from the old executive office building to the West Wing with his son to see the president on the day that the House Judiciary Committee votes on 2 articles of impeachment against him.
Many presidents probably wouldn't want to be seen with individuals under criminal investigation, just as a...
Well, that's a great point. And the head of the...
I'm going to end this to my viewers right there. There has been a very important step made today in impeachment trials of the judicial approves this type of charge. Once more going up into another tier towards getting that much more closer towards branding this particular president with this type of illegitimate actions. It's really sad that we're having to see this, because on the pediment of the things that this president has done good swings just as far to the far left as it has to the far right. It's in contrast to what we're actually seeing in live motion right in front of our very eyes towards reality defying itself the way that it has been defied this morning towards the House, to Judicial, making an approval for this to go on to the next level. I never would have thought in my soon-to-be 59 years that I would have ever seen something this contrast of going one way in one direction versus another way in another direction. It just proves the severity of the times that we're living in, of the once more the Pentagon being able to swing just as far to the far left as it does to far right in today's society in the 21st century. Hopefully we will find out the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help us God, in regard to the into the investigations of not only on the Republicans but also on the Democrats. I know that in these hearings there has been a great deal that has been brought out about the Bidens and about what went on with the Ukrainians, towards the Ukrainians disembarking and mismanaging funds from the American taxpayers. There's been a great deal of talk in that degree towards that. So who knows what the final embarkment's going to be towards branding this particular president with this particular brand. But from all indication as of right now, it looks like that he's going to be one of the chosen few that's going to be branded with this type of shame and this type of disgrace. Good luck to all of us, and thanks again for listening to the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Chiron, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Thanks again, and good luck to all of us. Shalom.